The sun beat down on the tiled courtyard of the harem. Date palms swayed gently in the warm breeze. Latifa sat on a low cushion, her fingers nimbly weaving a colorful tapestry. She was a woman of ample proportions, with round cheeks and a booming laugh. But today her laughter was quiet. The other concubines, slender as reeds, whispered behind their hands. Their words, though unspoken aloud, stung Latifa like a swarm of bees. "Look at her," they'd murmur. "So round, like a melon." Latifa pretended not to hear, focusing on the intricate patterns of her weaving. She knew she did not fit the harem's narrow ideal of beauty. Yet beneath her soft exterior, a core of steel ran strong. Nabir, the court jester, sauntered into the courtyard, his bells jingling merrily. His face was painted with a wide, exaggerated smile, but his eyes held a glint of cruelty. He bowed low before the group of women, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Ladies, my radiant flowers of the court, how do you bloom on this glorious day?" The women giggled, preening under his attention. Latifa kept her eyes downcast, her fingers moving faster over her tapestry. She knew Nabir's jests often came with a sting, and she was a frequent target. Later that evening, a grand banquet was held in the palace gardens. Latifa, along with the other concubines, was expected to perform a delicate dance for the assembled nobles. Music filled the air, and the women swayed like willows in the wind. Latifa, despite her size, moved with surprising grace. But as the dance reached its crescendo, Nabir, ever the entertainer, decided to add his own flourish. He pranced onto the dance floor, his bells jangling loudly. He circled Latifa, mimicking her movements with exaggerated clumsiness. The court erupted in laughter. "Look at the elephant dance," Nabir cried, pointing at Latifa. "She moves with the grace of 1,000 dumplings." The laughter grew louder, crueler. Latifa stumbled, her face burning with shame. Her heart pounded in her chest like a trapped bird. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the very tiles beneath her feet, but there was nowhere to hide. She stood frozen, the object of the court's amusement, Nabir's cruel laughter ringing in her ears, the sound of hooves on stone cut through the laughter. Prince Kava, his face flushed from the exertion of training his stallions, entered the banquet hall. Dust clung to his riding clothes, and his dark hair was pulled back from his forehead. He paused, taking in the scene before him. Latifa, humiliated, the court in hysterics, Nabir basking in the attention. Kava's brow furrowed. He had little patience for courtly games, and even less for cruelty disguised as wit. He strode forward, his boots echoing on the marble floor. The laughter gradually subsided, replaced by a ripple of murmurs. Kaveh ignored the whispers, his gaze fixed on Latifa. He reached out a hand, his expression serious. "Will you ride with me?" he asked, his voice clear and strong. Latifa stared at the outstretched hand, her mind reeling. This was Prince Kaveh, the fearless warrior known for taming the wildest stallions and speaking blunt truths. He was offering her the object of the court's ridicule, his hand. She looked from his hand to his face, searching for a hint of mockery, but found only sincerity. A flicker of hope ignited within her, a tiny spark in the darkness of her humiliation. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. Kava's grip was firm, reassuring. He led her past the stunned nobles, their whispers like buzzing insects. In the air, he did not look back, his focus solely on Latifa. As they reached the stable doors, the cool night air washed over them, carrying the scent of hay and horses. Latifa took a deep breath, the tension slowly easing from her shoulders. The ride, she knew, would be more than just a ride. It would be an escape, a moment of respite from the gilded cage of the harem. And perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something new. The stable was a haven of calm compared to the boisterous banquet hall. The air was thick with the warm scent of hay and horseflesh. Lanterns cast long shadows, dancing on the stone walls. Kaveh led Latifa to a gentle mare, her coat the color of polished ebony. He helped her mount, his hands lingering on her waist for a moment longer than necessary. "She's called Midnight," Kaveh said, his voice softer than Latifa had ever heard it, gentle as a lamb but with a spirit of fire. He mounted his own stallion, a magnificent white beast with a flowing mane. They rode out into the night, the cool air a welcome balm on Latifa's burning cheeks. The palace gardens, bathed in moonlight, seemed a world away from the stifling confines of the harem. For a while, they rode in silence, the only sound, the rhythmic beat of hooves on the soft earth. "I dislike those courtly gatherings," Kaveh said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost a murmur. "All that pretense, all those whispers and veiled insults." Latifa nodded, her heart echoing his sentiment. "It is a tiring dance," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "A dance I have no desire to participate in," Kaveh said, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "I prefer the honesty of the stables. Here, at least, there is no need for masks." Latifa looked at him, surprised by his candor. He was not like the other nobles with their polished words and empty gestures. He was real. "I feel like an outsider there," Latifa confessed, her voice gaining strength. "Like a bird with clipped wings, unable to soar." Kaveh turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "You are not alone," he said simply. They continued to ride, the silence now comfortable, companionable. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, their hopes for a future beyond the palace walls. Latifa found herself opening up to Kaveh in a way she never had before. His blunt honesty was disarming, his quiet strength a balm to her wounded spirit. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, they turned their horses back towards the palace. Latifa knew that she would have to face the whispers and the stares again, but this time she felt a newfound strength within her. The ride with Kaveh had been more than just an escape. It had been a revelation. She was not just the object of the court's mockery. She was Latifa, a woman with a spirit as strong and fiery as the mare she had ridden, and in Prince Kaveh she had found an unexpected ally, a kindred spirit in a world of gilded cages. The days that followed the moonlit ride were filled with stolen moments. Latifa would catch Kaveh's eye across the crowded courtyard, a silent exchange passing between them. He would find excuses to visit the harem gardens, ostensibly to admire the exotic flowers, but his gaze would always find Latifa. They would speak in hushed tones under the shade of the date palms, their conversations a mix of playful banter and earnest confessions. He would tell her of his training sessions with the royal stallions, of the thrill of the chase and the satisfaction of taming a wild spirit. She would speak of her longing for a life beyond the harem walls, of her dreams of seeing the world and experiencing all its wonders. He would listen intently, his dark eyes filled with a warmth that made her heart flutter. One afternoon, as they sat by the fountain, the gentle splash of water masking their words, Kaveh plucked a jasmine blossom from a nearby vine and tucked it behind Latifa's ear. "You remind me of this flower," he said, his voice low and husky, "strong and beautiful, with a fragrance that lingers long after it's gone." Latifa blushed, her cheeks flushed with pleasure. No one had ever spoken to her with such tenderness, such genuine admiration. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers brushing against his calloused skin. A spark ignited between them, a silent acknowledgement of the growing connection. Their stolen moments became a refuge, a sanctuary from the prying eyes and whispered judgments of the court. In Kaveh's presence, Latifa felt seen, valued, cherished. The insecurities that had plagued her for so long began to fade. replaced by a burgeoning confidence. She found herself laughing more freely, her booming laugh echoing through the gardens, no longer a source of shame, but a testament to her joy. Carver, too, seemed to find solace in their secret meetings. He confided in her about the pressures of being a prince, the burden of duty and the constant scrutiny of the court. He told her of his dislike for the elaborate rituals and the endless parade of suitors vying for his attention. He confessed that he longed for a love that was true and genuine, a love that transcended titles and appearances. As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams for the future, their deepest fears and insecurities. They discovered a shared love for adventure, a mutual disdain for courtly pretense, and a profound respect for each other's strength and resilience. In the quiet intimacy of their stolen moments, a love story began to unfold, a love story that defied the expectations of the court and the constraints of their circumstances. Latifa found herself smiling more often. The heavy cloak of self-doubt that had weighed her down for so long seemed lighter now, almost buoyant. Kave's kindness, his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings, had planted a seed of hope within her heart. She found herself looking forward to their stolen moments, to the warmth of his gaze and the sound of his laughter. Could it be possible, she wondered, that a prince, a warrior known for his strength and bravery, could truly see her Latifa for who she was beyond her outward appearance? But as her happiness grew, so too did a nagging voice of doubt. Was it all too good to be true? Was Carver's attention merely a fleeting fancy, a momentary distraction from the pressures of court life? She had seen it happen before, witnessed the fickle nature of affections within the palace walls. A prince, especially one as sought after as Carver, had many obligations, many expectations to fulfill. He was expected to marry for advantage, for political alliances, not for love. What place did a simple concubine, a woman ridiculed for her, sighs and mocked for her aspirations, have in the life of a prince? The whispers of the other concubines, once a source of constant pain, now echoed the doubts within her own mind. "He's just amusing himself," they'd murmur. "It won't last." Their words, though cruel, resonated with a fear that Latifa couldn't quite shake off. She had allowed herself to hope, to believe in the possibility of a future with Carver. But what if that hope was misplaced? What if she was setting herself up for heartbreak? The weight of her insecurities pressed down on her, threatening to smother the fragile flame of hope that Carver had ignited. She found herself questioning his every word, searching for hidden meanings in his gestures. Was his touch truly genuine, or was it simply a gesture of polite courtesy? Was his laughter sincere, or was it a mask concealing indifference? The seed of doubt, once planted, began to take root, its tendrils wrapping around her heart, squeezing the joy from her newfound happiness. Nabir, the court jester, watched from the shadows, his painted smile a grotesque mask of resentment. Carver's attention to Latifa had not gone unnoticed. The whispers had reached his ears, the whispers of the prince and the concubine, the stolen moments, the shared laughter. Nabir's popularity depended on the court's amusement, and Latifa had been a reliable source of that amusement. Now Carver, with his unexpected kindness, was disrupting the established order, stealing Nabir's spotlight, and worse, making Latifa less of a target for his cruel jests. Jealousy gnawed at him, a bitter poison in his heart. He could not bear to see Latifa happy, to see her basking in the prince's attention. He needed to reclaim his position as the court's favorite entertainer, and to do that, he needed to bring Latifa down, to remind everyone, including Carver, of her place. He began to spin a web of lies, whispering poisonous words into the ears of those who would listen. He sought out the queen's confidant, a woman known for her love of gossip and her disdain for those she deemed beneath her. He painted a picture of Latifa as a cunning manipulator, a woman using her newfound connection to the prince for her own gain. "She's a clever one, that Latifa," he'd murmur, his voice dripping with false concern. "She knows how to play the victim, how to tug at the prince's heartstrings. She's after status, power, influence. Mark my words, she'll use the prince and then discard him like a broken toy." He embellished his stories with fabricated details, adding a layer of plausibility to his lies. He claimed to have overheard Latifa boasting about her influence over Kaveh, bragging about her plans to rise within the ranks of the harem. He hinted at secret meetings, whispered promises, and clandestine exchanges of gifts. The queen's confidant, eager for a juicy piece of gossip, lapped up Nabir's lies like a thirsty cat. She repeated the stories to the queen, adding her own embellishments, her own interpretations of Latifa's supposed motives. The poison spread through the court, seeping into the conversations of the nobles, the whispers of the servants, the judgments of the other concubines. Latifa, unaware of the web of deceit being woven around her, continued to cherish her stolen moments with Kaveh, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Nabir, meanwhile, watched from the shadows, a cruel smile playing on his lips. His poison was working, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it reached its intended target. The grand hall of the palace buzzed with activity. Servants scurried back and forth, polishing silver platters and arranging fragrant flowers. Nobles, dressed in their finest silks and jewels, milled about, exchanging pleasantries and veiled insults. The air crackled with anticipation. A royal decree was about to be announced. Prince Kaveh stood beside his father, the king, his expression unreadable. He had just returned from a grueling training session with the royal cavalry, his muscles aching, his mind weary. He had hoped for a moment of quiet, a chance to escape the stifling atmosphere of the court, but his father had summoned him, and a prince did not refuse a royal summons. The king, a stern-faced man with a crown of silver hair, raised his hand, silencing the chatter in the hall. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice booming across the vast space. "Noble lords and ladies," he announced, "we have gathered here today to address a matter of great importance, a matter that will secure the future of our kingdom." He paused, letting his words sink in. Kaveh shifted uncomfortably, a knot forming in his stomach. He had a premonition of what was to come. "As you all know," the king continued, "our kingdom has long been threatened by the neighboring kingdom of Eldoria. Their armies are vast, their ambitions boundless. We have for many years sought to maintain a fragile peace, but recent events have made it clear that this peace cannot hold." Kaveh's jaw tightened. He knew that war with Eldoria was inevitable. He had been preparing for it his entire life. "Therefore," the king declared, his voice ringing with authority, "we have reached an agreement with the kingdom of Eridor, a powerful ally whose strength will bolster our defenses and ensure our victory against Eldoria." A ripple of murmurs ran through the assembled nobles. Eridor was known for its wealth, its powerful army, and its beautiful princesses. "To seal this alliance," the king continued, his gaze sweeping across the hall, finally settling on Kaveh, "Prince Kaveh will take a bride from the royal house of Eridor. Princess Amara, renowned for her beauty and grace, has been chosen as his future queen." A gasp escaped Latifa's lips, where she stood amongst the other concubines, hidden in the shadows at the edge of the hall. The jasmine blossom Kaveh had given her tucked safely in her pocket suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Her heart plummeted to her stomach, a cold dread washing over her. It was as she had feared. Kaveh was a prince, and princes married for duty, for alliances, not for love. Kaveh stood frozen, his mind reeling. Princess Amara. He had heard of her, of course, a princess of renowned beauty, a pawn in the game of political maneuvering. He had never met her, but he knew that she represented everything he despised. About courtly life, the superficiality, the artifice, the endless pursuit of power and prestige. He glanced towards the shadows, searching for Latifa's face, hoping to catch her eye, to offer her a silent reassurance. But he could not see her, and the knot in his stomach tightened. The king, oblivious to his son's inner turmoil, continued to speak, outlining the details of the upcoming nuptials, the lavish celebrations, the political implications of the alliance. His words echoed in Kave's ears, hollow and meaningless. He was trapped, bound by duty, his future predetermined. He was to marry a princess he did not know, a princess he did not love, while the woman who held his heart remained hidden in the shadows, her dreams, like his, fading into the cold reality of courtly decree. Latifa saw the change in Kave. Immediately, he became distant, withdrawn. His smiles, once so readily offered, became rare, fleeting. His gaze, which had once sought hers across the crowded courtyard, now avoided her. He no longer sought out her company in the harem gardens, no longer whispered secrets under the shade of the date palms. The stolen moments, once a source of joy and solace, became a painful reminder of what she had lost. She saw him in the company of Princess Amara, the slender, elegant princess from Eridor. They would stroll through the palace gardens, their laughter echoing in the air, a constant reminder of Latifa's exclusion. She watched them from afar, her heart aching with a dull, persistent pain. She tried to tell herself that she had known all along that it wouldn't last, that a prince, especially one as sought after as Kave, could never truly be interested in a concubine, a woman ridiculed for her size and mocked for her aspirations. She had allowed herself to hope, to dream of a future that could never be. Now that dream was shattered, broken into 1,000 pieces, scattering like dust in the wind. She retreated into herself, seeking solace in the quiet solitude of her chambers. She picked up her tapestry, her fingers moving mechanically over the colorful threads, but her mind was elsewhere. The vibrant patterns blurred before her eyes, replaced by the image of Kava and Princess Amara, their hands clasped, their laughter echoing in her ears. The other concubines, sensing her vulnerability, renewed their taunts, their whispers sharper, crueler than before. "See, we told you," they'd murmur. "He was just amusing himself. He's found a real princess now, a woman worthy of his attention." Latifa ignored them, her silence a shield against their barbs. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her pain, of witnessing her heartbreak. She would bear her burden in silence, her dignity intact. She knew that she had to move on, to accept the reality of her situation. Kave was destined for a life of duty, of political alliances and arranged marriages. She was a concubine, her place in the hierarchy of the court clearly defined. Their paths had crossed for a brief, shining moment, a fleeting intersection of two vastly different worlds. But now those paths were diverging, leading them in opposite directions. She would cherish the memory of their stolen moments, the warmth of his gaze, the sound of his laughter. She would carry those memories with her, a secret treasure hidden deep within her heart. But she would not allow herself to dwell on what could have been. She would not allow herself to be consumed by bitterness and regret. She would rise. Above her heartbreak, her spirit unbroken, her dignity intact, she would find her own path, her own way to soar, even with clipped wings. Latifa's heart ached, a heavy weight in her chest. The whispers of the other concubines, once so easily dismissed, now echoed the doubts that plagued her own mind. She felt a profound sense of loss, not just for Kava, but for the fleeting glimpse of happiness she had allowed herself to believe in. Yet, amidst the pain, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She would not crumble. She would not let their cruelty or Kava's apparent rejection define her. She began to spend more time with the older women of the harem, the ones who had weathered their own storms of heartbreak and disappointment. These women, often overlooked and dismissed by the younger, more ambitious concubines, possessed a quiet wisdom, a resilience forged in the crucible of experience. They listened patiently as Latifa poured out her heart, offering words of comfort and understanding. One such woman, Zara, a kind-faced woman with silver threading through her dark hair, shared her own story of unrequited love and the lessons she had learned. "A broken heart can mend, child," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It may leave scars, but those scars can make you stronger, more resilient." Zara taught Latifa the importance of self-reliance, of finding strength within herself rather than seeking validation from others. She encouraged Latifa to focus on her own talents, to cultivate her skills and passions. She reminded her that true beauty came not from outward appearance, but from the strength of one's character. Latifa began to rediscover the joy she had found in her weaving, the intricate patterns a source of comfort and focus. She also began to explore other interests, learning from the older women the art of herbal remedies, the secrets of traditional cooking, and the ancient practice of storytelling. She also discovered a shared sense of marginalization amongst some of the other women, women who, like her, did not fit the narrow mold of beauty favored by the court. Women who were overlooked and dismissed because of their age, their background, or their physical appearance. She began to see a strength in these women, a quiet resilience that had allowed them to survive and even thrive in a world that often sought to diminish them. An idea began to take shape in Latifa's mind, a plan to empower these women, to help them find their own voices, their own strength. She started to share her knowledge of weaving, teaching the other women how to create beautiful tapestries, how to express their own stories through the intricate patterns of threads and colors. She shared the wisdom she had learned from Zara and the other older women, encouraging them to find their own sources of strength, to cultivate their talents, and to celebrate their unique qualities. She organized small gatherings, creating a safe space where the women could share their stories, their hopes, and their fears. She encouraged them to support one another, to offer words of encouragement and understanding. She began to see a change in these women, a newfound confidence, a sense of solidarity. They were no longer isolated individuals, victims of the court's whims and judgments. They were a community, a sisterhood, bound together by their shared experiences and their determination to find their own place in the world. Latifa, in her quest to heal her own broken heart, had inadvertently begun to build something much larger, something more meaningful. She had planted a seed of rebellion, a quiet revolution within the walls of the harem, a movement that would empower women to find their own strength, their own beauty, and their own voices. Kaveh paced the length of his private chambers, the weight of the impending marriage pressing down on him like a physical burden. The image of Princess Amara, serene and elegant, floated in his mind, but it evoked no warmth, no spark of connection. He saw her as a gilded cage, a symbol of the suffocating constraints of his royal duty. His thoughts drifted to Latifa, her laughter echoing in his memory, her genuine warmth, a stark contrast to the cool formality of the princess. He recalled their shared moments in the stable, their moonlit ride, the easy camaraderie that had blossomed between them. He missed her quick wit, her booming laugh, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her dreams. He had withdrawn from her, convinced that it was the only way to protect her from the inevitable heartbreak. He believed he was acting in her best interest, shielding her from the harsh realities of his royal obligations. But now, separated from her, he realized the depth of his mistake. The emptiness he felt in her absence was a constant ache, a void that Princess Amara's presence could not fill. He had chosen duty over his heart, and the price he was paying was a heavy one. He stopped pacing and sank onto a plush divan, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He was trapped, caught between the demands of his father and the desires of his own heart. He knew that marrying Princess Amara would secure the alliance with Eridor, strengthening his kingdom against the threat of Eldoria. He understood the political necessity, the weight of his responsibility as a prince, but the thought of spending his life with a woman he didn't love, a woman who represented everything he despised about courtly life, filled him with a profound sense of dread. He sought the counsel of Hakim, his father's trusted advisor, a man known for his wisdom and his unwavering loyalty to the crown. Hakim listened patiently as Kaveh poured out his heart, his voice thick with frustration and despair. "Duty is a heavy burden, Your Highness," Hakim acknowledged, his voice calm and steady. "But it is not the only burden a prince must bear. A wise ruler must also consider the well-being of his people, the strength of his kingdom. An alliance with Eridor will bring stability and prosperity to our land." Kaveh sighed, acknowledging the truth in Hakim's words. "But what of my own happiness, Hakim?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "Am I to sacrifice my own heart for the sake of the kingdom?" Hakim considered his words carefully before replying. "Happiness can be found in many forms, Your Highness," he said gently. "Sometimes duty and happiness can coexist. Perhaps in time you will find affection for Princess Amara. Perhaps you will discover that she possesses qualities you have yet to see." Kaveh remained silent, unconvinced. He knew that he could never love Amara, not in the way he loved Latifa. Hakim continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "But there is another path, Your Highness. A more difficult path, but one that may lead to greater fulfillment. You could choose to defy your father, to choose love over duty, but such a choice would have consequences. It could jeopardize the alliance with Eridor, weaken our defenses against Eldoria. It could even divide the court, create unrest among the nobles." Kaveh knew the risks. He knew that defying his father would be a dangerous gamble. But as he thought of Latifa, of her strength and her resilience, of the genuine connection they shared, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to reconcile duty and love, to find a path that would lead to both the well-being of his kingdom and the happiness of his own heart. Kaveh, emboldened by Hakim's words and fueled by his longing for Latifa, began to subtly push back against his father's decree. He knew a direct confrontation would be disastrous, so he chose a more subtle approach, planting seeds of dissent within the court. He started by engaging in quiet conversations with key nobles, men and women, known for their independent thinking and their influence within the royal circle. He spoke of the importance of choosing a bride based on character and compatibility, rather than political expediency. He emphasized the need for a queen who would be not just a figurehead, but a true partner, a source of strength and support. He did not mention Latifa by name, but he spoke of the qualities he admired in a woman: strength, resilience, kindness, a genuine heart. He subtly hinted at his own unhappiness with the arranged marriage, letting his discontent be known without directly defying his father's authority. His words, carefully chosen and strategically placed, began to circulate through the court, sparking whispers of dissent. Some nobles, weary of the king's autocratic rule, saw in Kaveh's subtle rebellion a glimmer of hope for a more enlightened leadership. Others, motivated by their own personal ambitions, saw an opportunity to gain favor with the future king by supporting his cause. The whispers reached the ears of the queen, who, though bound by tradition, harbored a secret admiration for Latifa's strength and spirit. She had witnessed the casual cruelty Latifa endured from the other concubines, and she had been impressed by Latifa's quiet dignity, her refusal to be broken by their taunts. She had also observed the genuine affection between Kaveh and Latifa, and she secretly hoped that her son would find happiness, even if it meant defying his father's wishes. The queen, a shrewd and calculating woman, saw an opportunity to subtly influence the situation. She began to subtly promote Latifa within the harem, giving her more prominent roles in courtly events, showcasing her talents and her intelligence. She arranged for Latifa to oversee the preparation of a grand feast for the visiting dignitaries from Eridor, giving her a chance to demonstrate her organizational skills and her culinary expertise. Latifa, unaware of the queen's machinations, embraced the opportunity with her characteristic enthusiasm. She poured her heart and soul into the preparations, creating a feast that was not only visually stunning, but also a testament to her culinary creativity. She incorporated traditional recipes from her own background, adding a unique and flavorful touch to the otherwise predictable courtly fare. The feast was a resounding success, impressing not only the visiting dignitaries, but also the king himself. The king, a man who appreciated good food and efficient organization, praised Latifa's efforts, acknowledging her talent and her dedication. Kaveh, watching from across the hall, felt a surge of pride. He saw the whispers of admiration among the nobles, the subtle nods of approval from his mother. His plan was working. He was subtly shifting the court's perception of Latifa, elevating her status, making her a more viable candidate for his affections, and perhaps even for his hand in marriage. The whispers of rebellion were growing louder, and Kaveh knew that the tide was beginning to turn. Nabir, consumed by resentment and desperate to regain his position as the court's favorite, hatched a sinister plan. He knew he couldn't directly confront Kaveh, nor could he openly attack Latifa without raising suspicion. So he decided to resort to a more covert method: poison. He believed that if Latifa were to become ill or worse, it would remove her from the prince's affections and restore Nabir to his former prominence. He procured a potent poison, a colorless, odorless liquid that could be easily slipped into food or drink. He planned to add it to Latifa's evening meal, a seemingly innocuous act that would have devastating consequences. He chose a night when the kitchen staff would be reduced, a night when he could slip in unnoticed and carry out his wicked deed. On the chosen night, Nabir crept into the royal kitchens, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. He moved stealthily through the dimly lit room, his eyes scanning for Latifa's designated meal tray. He found it sitting on a counter, waiting to be delivered to the harem. He carefully uncorked the vial of poison, his hand trembling slightly. He was about to commit a terrible act, an act that could cost Latifa her life. As he leaned over the tray, preparing to add the poison, a small voice spoke from the shadows. "What are you doing?" Nabir froze, his heart leaping into his throat. He whirled around, his eyes widening in surprise. Standing in the shadows was a young kitchen boy, his eyes wide with fear and suspicion. The boy, no older than 12, clutched a bucket and a scrubbing brush, his face pale in the dim light. Nabir tried to regain his composure, forcing a smile onto his face. "Just admiring the fine cuisine, my boy," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Nothing to be concerned about." The boy, however, did not look convinced. He had seen the vial in Nabir's hand, the furtive movements, the look of desperation in his eyes. "You were going to poison her food, weren't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nabir's smile faltered. He knew he had been caught. He considered threatening the boy, silencing him before he could reveal what he had seen, but the boy, though small and frightened, held a look of determination in his eyes, a quiet strength that surprised Nabir. "You mustn't tell anyone what you saw," Nabir hissed, his voice menacing. "It could mean your life." The boy stood his ground, his small frame trembling, but his gaze unwavering. He had heard whispers in the kitchens, whispers of Nabir's jealousy, of his resentment towards Latifa. He knew that Nabir was capable of anything, but he also knew that he couldn't let him get away with poisoning Latifa. He shook his head, his voice firm. "I won't let you hurt her," he said. Nabir's eyes narrowed, his anger flaring. He lunged towards the boy, intending to silence him permanently. But before he could reach him, the head chef entered the kitchen, his booming voice echoing through the room. "What's all this commotion?" he demanded, his eyes scanning the room. The kitchen boy, seizing his opportunity, pointed at Nabir, his voice trembling but clear. He was trying to poison Latifa's food. The head chef, a large, imposing man with a reputation for fairness and integrity, looked at Nabir, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He had heard the whispers about Nabir's jealousy, and he had his own suspicions about the jester's character. "Is this true, Nabir?" he demanded, his voice stern. Nabir, trapped and exposed, could only stammer a denial. But the kitchen boy's testimony, coupled with the vial of poison still clutched in Nabir's hand, was damning evidence. The head chef immediately apprehended Nabir, his large hands gripping the jester's arms with surprising strength. He knew that this was a matter that needed to be brought to the attention of the king. The loyal kitchen boy, his heart pounding with fear, but also with a sense of righteousness, had saved Latifa's life. Flags snapped in the brisk wind, the bright colors a vibrant contrast to the polished stone of the parade grounds. The annual military parade was in full swing, a dazzling display of the kingdom's might. Soldiers, clad in gleaming armor, marched in perfect formation, their boots striking the ground in unison. Horses, their manes braided with ribbons, pranced and snorted, eager to display their prowess. The crowd, gathered along the edges of the parade grounds, cheered and waved, their faces alight with excitement. Latifa stood among the spectators, her heart swelling with pride. She had been invited to attend the parade by the Queen, a subtle but significant gesture of acceptance. She wore a simple but elegant gown, her hair adorned with a single jasmine blossom. She watched as Kaveh, resplendent in his military uniform, rode at the head of the royal cavalry, his bearing proud, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Suddenly a commotion erupted at the far end of the parade grounds. A magnificent black stallion, startled by a sudden burst of fireworks, reared up on its hind legs, its eyes wide with fear. The stallion's rider, a young, inexperienced soldier, lost his grip and tumbled to the ground. The horse, now free of its rider, bolted across the parade grounds, its powerful legs churning up dust and debris. Panic rippled through the crowd. People screamed and scattered, scrambling to get out of the stallion's path. Children cried, their parents frantically pulling them to safety. The stallion, its fear escalating, charged towards a group of children who had become separated from their families. The situation was dire. A tragedy seemed imminent. Latifa, her heart pounding in her chest, saw the imminent danger. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her ample frame surprisingly agile. She positioned herself between the children and the oncoming stallion, her arms outstretched, her voice calm and steady. "Whoa there, boy!" she called out, her voice resonating with a surprising authority. "Easy now! Easy!" The stallion, its ears twitching, its nostrils flaring, slowed its pace, its wild eyes fixed on Latifa. She continued to speak to the animal, her voice soothing, reassuring. She moved slowly towards the stallion, her hands outstretched, her palms open, offering a gesture of peace. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their fear momentarily forgotten. They had never seen anything like it. Latifa, the concubine they had so often mocked and ridiculed, was facing down a wild stallion, her courage unwavering, her presence commanding. The stallion, Its fear gradually subsiding, stopped its charge just a few feet from Latifa. It lowered its head, sniffing the air cautiously. Latifa continued to speak to the animal, her voice soft and gentle, stroking its neck with a reassuring touch. Slowly, carefully, she led the stallion away from the children, guiding it towards the edge of the parade grounds, where several experienced horsemen were waiting to secure the animal. The crowd erupted in cheers, their fear replaced by awe and admiration. Latifa, the woman they had so often dismissed, had become their hero. The cheers of the crowd echoed across the parade grounds, a wave of sound that washed over Latifa, warming her from the inside out. She stood beside the now calmed stallion, her hand resting on its sleek neck, a small smile playing on her lips. She had acted instinctively, her concern for the children overriding any fear for her own safety. She had not sought recognition, had not anticipated the outpouring of admiration. She had simply done what she felt was right. Kaveh dismounted his own horse and strode towards Latifa, his eyes shining with pride. He had witnessed her bravery, her calm demeanor in the face of danger, and his heart swelled with admiration. He reached her side, taking her hand in his. "Latifa," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you were magnificent. You saved those children." Latifa blushed, her cheeks flushed with pleasure. "It was nothing," she murmured, her gaze downcast. "It was everything," Kaveh insisted, his grip tightening on her hand. He turned to the crowd, his voice ringing with authority. "This woman," he announced, gesturing towards Latifa, "is a true hero. She risked her own safety to protect the innocent. She deserves our respect, our admiration, our gratitude." The crowd roared its approval, their cheers echoing Kaveh's words. Latifa, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, looked up at Kaveh, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, the barriers between them, the constraints of their different social standings, seemed to melt away. She saw in his eyes not just admiration, but something deeper, something that mirrored the feelings in her own heart. Kaveh led Latifa away from the crowd, towards a quieter corner of the parade grounds. He wanted to speak to her privately, to express the emotions that were swirling within him. "Latifa," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I owe you an apology. I've been a fool." Latifa looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked. Kaveh took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on hers. "I withdrew from you because I believed I was protecting you," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was sparing you from the pain of my impending marriage to Princess Amara, but I was wrong. I was a coward. I should have trusted you, trusted our connection." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "I was bullied as a boy," he revealed, a vulnerability in his voice that Latifa had never heard before. "I was chubby, awkward. The other boys taunted me, mocked me for my size. I learned to hide my insecurities, to build a wall around my heart. When I saw Nabir mocking you, it brought back all those painful memories. I wanted to protect you, but in doing so I hurt you. I hurt myself." Latifa's heart ached for him, for the boy who had been bullied, for the prince who still carried those scars. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers brushing against his calloused skin. "Kaveh," she said softly, "you don't need to hide from me. I understand." At that moment, the head chef approached them, his face grim. He explained the incident in the kitchen, Nabir's attempt to poison Latifa, the loyal kitchen boy who had witnessed the act and bravely spoken out. Kaveh's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening with anger. He had suspected Nabir's involvement all along, but now he had proof. He turned to Latifa, his voice filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry, Latifa," he said. "I should have protected you from him." Latifa shook her head, her gaze steady. "You did protect me, Kaveh," she said softly. "You gave me strength. You gave me hope. And now, the truth is revealed. Nabir will be dealt with." Kaveh nodded, his resolve hardening. He knew what he had to do. He would confront Nabir, expose his treachery, and ensure that he would never again harm Latifa or anyone else. He would also defy his father, reject the arranged marriage, and choose a bride based on character, not political expediency. He would choose Latifa. The grand hall of the palace was hushed, the usual boisterous atmosphere replaced by a palpable tension. Nabir, stripped of his jester's motley and his bells, stood before the king, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously. Around the room, the loyal kitchen boy stood beside the head chef, his small frame trembling slightly, but his gaze steady. He recounted the events in the kitchen, his voice clear and unwavering, describing how he had seen Nabir with the vial of poison, how he had overheard the jester's muttered threats. Kaveh stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. He recounted Latifa's bravery at the parade, her selfless act of courage that had saved the children from the runaway stallion. He spoke of the admiration and respect she had earned from the court, the people, and himself. Then, his voice hardening, he described Nabir's cruel mockery of Latifa, his relentless taunts and jests that had caused her so much pain. He revealed Nabir's plot to poison Latifa, his desperate attempt to silence her, to eliminate her from the court. The king, his face grim, listened intently. He had always valued loyalty and courage, and he had been deeply impressed by Latifa's actions. At the parade, he had also been disturbed by the whispers of Nabir's cruelty, his growing concern about the jester's influence within the court. Now, with the evidence presented before him, he knew that he had to act. "Nabir," the king declared, his voice booming across the hall, "you have betrayed the trust placed in you. You have shown yourself to be cruel, deceitful, and dangerous. You are hereby banished from the court. You will be escorted from the palace immediately and forbidden to ever return." Nabir's face crumpled, his eyes filling with tears of fear and regret. He opened his mouth to speak, to plead for forgiveness, but the king silenced him with a wave of his hand. Two guards stepped forward, gripping Nabir's arms and leading him away, his pleas echoing through the silent hall. Kaveh watched Nabir's departure, a sense of satisfaction mixed with a lingering unease. He had exposed Nabir's treachery, but he knew that the deeper issue, the court's obsession with superficiality and its tolerance of cruelty, remained. He turned to his father, his gaze steady, his voice firm. "Father," he said, "I have a request." The king looked at his son, his brow furrowed in anticipation. He had sensed a change in Kaveh, a newfound confidence and resolve. "I have come to realize that true worth lies not in titles or appearances, but in character and deeds," Kaveh declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "I have learned that true beauty comes not from outward form, but from the strength of one's spirit, the kindness of one's heart." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled court, finally settling on Latifa, who stood at the edge of the hall, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Therefore," Kaveh announced, his voice clear and strong, "I have decided to reject the arranged marriage with Princess Amara. I will choose my own bride, a woman who embodies the qualities I admire, a woman who possesses the strength, the courage, and the kindness to stand beside me as my queen." A gasp rippled through the court. The king's face hardened, his eyes flashing with anger. He opened his mouth to speak, to rebuke his son, but Kaveh held up a hand, silencing him. "I will marry for love, father," Kaveh declared, his voice unwavering. "I will choose a bride who will not just be a queen, but a partner, a confidant, a true companion. I will choose Latifa." A hush fell over the grand hall, so profound it seemed to muffle the very air they breathed. Every eye turned to Latifa, standing near the edge of the hall. She felt a blush rise in her cheeks, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with shame and everything to do with the unwavering gaze of the prince. She had dared to hope, to dream of a future where she could stand beside Kaveh, but to hear him declare his intention so boldly, so publicly, was almost too much to bear. The king's face was a thundercloud. He opened his mouth to speak, but Kaveh, for the first time in his life, openly defied his father. "I have chosen, father," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "and my choice is not a political one, but one of the heart." He then strode across the hall, his gaze fixed on Latifa, and knelt before her. He took her hand, his touch sending a tremor through her arm. "Latifa," he said, his voice clear and strong, "will you do me the immeasurable honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Latifa's eyes, blurring her vision. She looked at Kaveh, at the sincerity in his eyes, the love shining in his gaze. She looked at the assembled court, at the stunned faces of the nobles, the whispers of disbelief rippling through the hall. She looked at the queen, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Then she looked back at Kaveh, her heart overflowing with joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times yes. Kaveh rose to his feet, his face radiant with happiness. He gently placed a ring on Latifa's finger, a simple band of gold, but to her it was more precious than any jewel. He then took her in his arms, their embrace a silent declaration of their love, a defiance of the court's expectations, a testament to the power of a genuine connection. The king, witnessing the depth of his son's affection for Latifa and recognizing the court's growing acceptance of her, softened his stance. He knew that a happy prince, a prince who ruled with his heart as well as his head, would be a strong and just ruler. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Kaveh's shoulder. "My son," he said, his voice gruff but affectionate, "may your love be as strong and enduring as the mountains that protect our kingdom." The court erupted in applause, their cheers a celebration not just of the upcoming nuptials, but of the triumph of love over duty, of character over appearance. Latifa, standing beside Kaveh, her hand clasped in his, felt a wave of warmth wash over her. She was no longer an outsider, no longer the object of mockery and ridicule. She was Latifa, the future queen, a woman chosen for her strength, her kindness, and her genuine heart. The wedding was a grand affair, a celebration that echoed throughout the kingdom. Latifa, radiant in her wedding gown, stood beside Kaveh, her eyes shining with happiness. But their love story was more than just a fairy tale romance. It was a catalyst for change within the court. Latifa, now queen, became a symbol of strength and compassion. She used her newfound influence to empower the women of the harem, teaching them self-defense, encouraging their education, and promoting their talents. She established workshops where women could learn various skills, from weaving and embroidery to herbal medicine and storytelling. She worked alongside Kaveh to reshape the court's perceptions of beauty, celebrating diversity and promoting inclusivity. She encouraged women to embrace their unique qualities, to find their own voices, and to stand tall in their own power. The whispers of mockery faded, replaced by whispers of admiration and respect. Latifa, the concubine who had once been mocked for her size, became a queen who was loved and revered for her strength, her wisdom, and her unwavering compassion. She and Kaveh, hand in hand, ruled with wisdom and kindness. Their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of a genuine connection to transform not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them.